Our first impressions of people are often based on how they talk, instead of what they're actually saying. We may stereotype social traits based on the kind of dialect that the individual is using. A dialect is a certain variety of language a person speaks. It can vary based on social class, ethnicity, or even gender. It's amazing how quickly someone can come to the conclusion about a person based on one word or phrase. Throughout this documentary, we will discuss how the dialects spoken in Kentucky are not monolithic, but rather extremely diverse. Also, we will discuss the linguistic history of Kentucky and previous work about Southern English. By interviewing both experts and students about dialects in Kentucky, we hope to better understand the misconceptions that some people have about language in our state.
The Kentucky census in 1820 showed that the ethnic makeup of the white population was 56% English, 18% Scottish, 8% Irish, 8% Welsh, and 10% other, which includes German, French, and Dutch. These populations brought their own language varieties and dialects with them.
From what we can tell, certainly English, Welsh, people of English and Welsh descent were the largest number of settlers, but also a good number of what has become known as Scotch-Irish individuals, Irish Protestants who came early waves into the United States, settled largely in the backcountry, and so they do this natural movement down the Valley of Virginia, and then eventually will cross the mountains into Kentucky. The mountains had, for a very long time, been both a psychological boundary and also a physical boundary, preventing settlement from moving west. But by the 1760s, you start to see hunters filtering into this area through the Cumberland Gap up into what will become Kentucky. And then following them, after 1775, that's really the first year where Kentucky is opened up to settlement, and you'll start to see individuals, some pretty intrepid folks, pretty brave people making that journey into Kentucky. But a lot of them of Scotch-Irish descent, English, Welsh. Later on, then some Germans that are coming. They're going to mainly come from northern routes, the two routes into Kentucky, almost funneling people through the Cumberland Gap and then also down the Ohio River. And a lot more of those that are coming down the Ohio River will be of German descent. And that will be a bit later. That'll be some of the later waves. But those early waves, you have a lot of Scotch-Irish too coming in. Land, good fertile land, this sense that many had that Kentucky was a promised land, that a man could come and start over, a good poor man's country. Some have described it a place where if you were brave, you were willing to take a risk, you could come with very little and start over. Although a lot of the people that are settling have many more resources, and so a lot of the plantation gentry from Virginia, again, that desire for good quality land that's cheap but more productive than the lands they're leaving in the east. And so I'd say number one is land, or if you want to classify that as the desire for wealth and the desire for to get ahead. But also people are coming to escape problems, escape debts, crimes they may have committed, and some are just adventurous and want to see a new place. Well, the hot spot in Kentucky is the central bluegrass area. That's the place that everyone is flocking to in the earliest days. That's the best land. That's seen as the prized territory. And, there's kind of a land rush going on to gobble up this land. Then eventually after that, one thing, Kentucky settled a little differently than other places where you often see an east to west movement. Kentucky you can picture as concentric circles. So from that inner bluegrass area, you got this movement out from that center. And so then moving later into eastern Kentucky, western Kentucky, by the early 19th century, the Green River area will be the hot place for settlement once those bluegrass lands are all claimed.
So there were 3 and perhaps at times 4 Native American languages spoken in Kentucky. So Cherokee, Shawnee, Chickasaw, and possibly Yuchi. So Yuchi may have been spoken in the southern part of Kentucky near the Tennessee border at one time. But because borders are always in flux sort of everywhere, it's not exactly clear where different tribes lived. But one thing that's interesting is that the regions of the Native American languages sort of correspond to similar sort of patterns you find in dialects of English today. So you had Cherokee, which is an Iroquoian language originally spoken further north, sort of in near upstate New York and in parts of Canada, is where the Iroquoian languages are found. And then Shawnee, which was spoken sort of in the bluegrass in central Kentucky, is an Algonquian language related to a lot of languages of the plains and the Midwest. And it was sort of the main language in Kentucky, sort of covered the broadest region. And then the area that is called the Jackson Purchase is distinct particularly because it was Chickasaw territory at the time of the arrival of Europeans. And it maintained Chickasaw, sort of stayed Chickasaw territory until it was purchased by Jackson, obviously. So Kentucky, in terms of Native American languages, shows the sort of same movement sort of as a center where you have sort of movement along the Ohio and through the Appalachians, where you have the Cherokee sort of coming down the Appalachians and settling in the eastern part of the country, and the Shawnee sort of moving along the Ohio, and the Chickasaw sort of moving up the Mississippi. So you find similar sort of patterns in terms of how language reflects the ways in which people migrate. Yeah, so it's often said that Kentucky was sort of a hunting ground that wasn't actually inhabited, and that the Shawnee came and hunted here but didn't actually live here. But that is a myth that was sort of developed in the early settlement era of Kentucky, sort of as a marketing scheme to try to get people to come and settle here. The idea that we don't have Indians was a great marketing tool at the time, but obviously it wasn't true. We have lots of stories like about people in Kentucky in conflict with particularly the Shawnee. Daniel Boone lived with the Shawnee for 5 years and spoke Shawnee, so it's clear that there were people here from before the time of Europeans.
English as a language has always been changing. From its roots as an Indo-European language, we see significant changes in both sounds as well as in grammar. We also see changes happening in English today within Kentucky, with changes coming from the north within the vowel system in the northern city shifts, where we see vowels like a being pronounced as I, as in bed, and the vowel ah being fronted to ah, as in Chicago. We see another shift coming from the south, the southern city shift, where vowels like I are pronounced as I, and vowels like aw are pronounced as aw, as in go dogs.
So the African American English spoken in central Kentucky, sort of in and around Lexington and further to the east, is distinctive among varieties of African American English in the U.S. because of its sort of overlap with varieties of Appalachian English spoken by whites. And part of the reason for this is the way that the sort of post-Civil War settlement patterns of African Americans in Kentucky. So rather than sort of maintain the plantation system by adopting sharecropping and just sort of basically running the same economic system, in Kentucky, small plots of land were sold to African Americans, enough to sort of let them live on their own, but not enough to actually support themselves with farming or anything like that, so that they would still have to sort of work for whites. But the fact that they weren't sort of all grouped together in a plantation-style system meant that you had more interaction between African Americans and working-class whites, so that the variety that you find in central and eastern Kentucky has a lot more overlap with Appalachian varieties than you would find anywhere else. So there's not a lot known about African American English in Kentucky, although it's clear that there are really distinct dialects, so that in eastern Kentucky, varieties of African American English seem to have a lot more influence from the varieties of Appalachian English spoken by white people in the area, compared to somewhere like Louisville, where you have something that's much more like the African American English you find in larger cities, say in the north. Whereas in Lexington, you have something in between. There's a lot of sort of research that needs to be done about sort of exactly the distinctions between African American English, but it's clear that it is the diversity that you find within dialects in African American communities are quite similar and equal to the diversity you find in varieties spoken by whites.
When the first Hispanic population arrived in Kentucky, they did it because they were looking for jobs, as is one of the main reasons. And they've been usually working in the horse industry and in the farms. It's usually outside, Lexington, outside the bigger cities. It has changed a lot in the last years, where we have an increase of Hispanic population, mostly Mexican population, that they live also in the bigger cities like Lexington, Louisville. I can speak mostly of Lexington, where I can tell that they are not anymore mostly involved in farms and in the horse industry. They have also their own restaurants and grocery stores, etc. The Hispanic population of Kentucky is not very diverse. I mean, we can probably say that the majority of the Hispanic population is from Mexico and Central America. Of course, you can always find speakers from other Spanish-speaking parts in Kentucky, but this is the majority one. The Hispanic population of Kentucky has definitely a big impact in the variety of Spanish that is spoken in the US. I mean, this is the main thing we can tell. Now, concerning the impact they might have on English spoken here, we can always, of course, assume that they will enhance some of the common borrowings we have in English already, that deal with food, with cultural elements, etc. How deep this impact is going to be as the Hispanic population in Kentucky has been growing recently, we'll see this in the future. We cannot predict it, actually.
So what were your perceptions of Kentucky before coming here?
I knew that people didn't wear shoes when they were in Kentucky, and that they didn't have a lot of teeth, so that's a problem. Otherwise, lots of horses, bourbon, and basketball.
Okay, so what were your opinions about Kentucky dialects?
I knew that a lot of them were like backwoodsy, like going to hunting, and like going fishing and stuff.
So would you say your opinions changed after you came here?
Oh yeah, definitely. I had a better perspective of I don't know, well, I knew people were educated, and people wore shoes, people wear a lot of shoes in Kentucky. That's good, and they do go to the dentist. People, they have different ways of talking, but it mainly is fostered by how you grow up and where you grow up in Kentucky. And it's something that you should just be respectful of and that you can even have pride in.
What were your perceptions of Kentucky before coming here?
Well, being from the West Coast, I very much thought of Kentucky as a southern state, as part of the Southeastern Conference. There's a lot of horse racing. I mean, I very pictured a lot of stereotypical southern twangs.
What were your opinions about Kentucky dialects?
Well, I didn't know too much about variation in Kentucky. I really thought it was all just one thing. This is Kentucky speak. They speak like they're from the South.
When you came here, did your opinions change? Why or why not?
Oh, without a doubt. Just meeting people from the East, from the South, from the West, from Louisville. I mean, there's a lot of mix of ways that people speak. People sound like they're from Chicago. People sound like they're from the South. People sound like they're from all over the place, really. Now, that's not even just the out-of-staters. That's a lot of the in-state people, too, because Kentucky, I didn't realize, was so close to Ohio, which is so close to Tennessee, so close to the East Coast. It was amazing to me how varied people's speech patterns were in this state.
Do you think that you have a dialect?
Without a doubt.
Give me an example.
Dude, dude.
Has your dialect changed since you got here?
I believe so. When I went home, actually, over winter break, my friends gave me a lot of flack about that. They tell me I sounded like I used to live in the backwoods and cook up moonshine, and obviously I laughed it off. But I think I really do kind of change the way that I speak. Coming here, hearing a lot of Southern variety and being from the West Coast, I think I really had to sort of adapt my speech patterns, and I think they really helped me kind of fit in and feel like I belonged a little bit more. I don't know if I really did it consciously or subconsciously, but I really do feel like I speak differently now.
What features of the Kentucky dialect are most interesting or surprising to you?
Pin-pen merger was very interesting. I did not know much about that, how people pronounce their vowels very, very elongated. Like instead of the word upset, they say things like upset. Or how the north side of Kentucky, there's a lot of, Midwestern variation. A lot of the vowel shift that kind of goes on. So instead of saying bad, they say bad. Stuff like that. I found that very interesting. Just a ton of variation that's fun. And also the double modals I found very interesting, as in, I might could help you tomorrow. That's not something I'm used to ever hearing, so I found that very interesting.
What were your perceptions of Kentucky before coming here?
I expected it to be a little more country, maybe.
Yeah.
Than it is. It's more Midwestern than country than I've expected.
So what were your opinions about dialects in Kentucky and the way people speak?
Well, I knew before I came here, I knew that people from Louisville didn't really have a major accent. So I guess I expected some accents, some not, to have southern accents.
When you came here, did your opinions change? And if so, why or why not?
Not terribly. They haven't changed that much. I would say that I'm kind of surprised by the amount of people from western Kentucky that have southern accents, because it's almost even more Midwestern than Louisville, but it's definitely more. People I know, at least from western Kentucky, definitely have bigger accents than anyone else I've met.
And do you think you have a dialect?
I think I have. I talk similar to the people that from the area I'm from, but I'm not sure what kind of dialect that is, because there's not, a big Pennsylvania dialect.
Has your dialect changed in any way? Have you added or lost anything since you've been here?
Some people say it. I have. My roommate. One of my roommates has a really heavy Southern accent, and some people, when I go home, say every once in a while I'll say a word a little differently, but not much.
What features of dialect in Kentucky are most interesting or surprising to you?
I don't know. Really, I guess the fact that people from some states or some areas have extremely Southern accents and some don't. Even though they're from the same area, just kind of.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's technically about the dialect, but the area where they speak it is.
I feel like there's different areas in Kentucky that have thicker accents.
I would say Bowling Green. A lot of the kids I've met from there have pretty thick accents, but some people come from there with no accent at all. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I just need you to read that out loud for us and then tell us what it is.
Burgoo. Isn't it like a spice?
It's a spicy stew.
Yeah.
This says burgoo, and I have never heard that before.
What do you think it means?
I really have no idea.
How do you say this word?
Burgoo.
What is it?
Type of burger.
It's a stew, actually.
Ooh, shoot.
Buggy is like a car buggy, I would think. Or maybe a carriage sort of thing with
Buggy.
What is it?
Car. Oh, a horse-drawn carriage!
It says a railroad caboose or to go away.
Okay, so neither.
Buggy off. It's also a shopping cart in some places.
Oh, right.
Toboggan, like a sled toboggan, I would assume. That's what I think of.
How do you say this word?
Toboggan.
What is it?
It's a sled.
Actually, in Kentucky, it's a hat.
Ah.
People use it to describe a beanie.
It's a sled.
I don't know. I don't really know what hot water cornbread is, but I know that cornbread is bread, and there's corn in it, and it tastes good with chili, so I'm sure you make this kind with hot water.
Hot water cornbread? I don't know exactly what it says.
It's cornbread mixture of cornmeal and water cooked on a skillet.
Oh, yummy.
What's this?
In Louisville, which I did used to say Louisville before I got here, but now I know to say it Louisville.
Louisville. How do you say this?
Louisville.
Good.
Yeah, got that one down.
In contrary to stereotypical generalizations, Kentucky is a linguistically diverse state, in part because of a rich history of settler migration. This has made present-day Kentucky a linguistic crossroads between Northern and Southern American dialects.
Kentucky's an amazing place, and I'm really happy to do research here. I'm actually happy to be from here because it's located at a wonderfully interesting crossroads in the United States. As I describe the migration patterns into the state, we have influences that come from both the North or the Midwest and the South, and that mix has made the dialects an interesting mix as well.
Few Kentucky cities exemplify this linguistic mix more than Lexington, home of the University of Kentucky and the state's flagship institution of higher learning. UK campus and its surrounding neighborhoods serve as home to a regionally diverse mix of students and consequently a diverse mix of state dialects.
In terms of linguistic features, Lexington is such a mix because people come to the University of Kentucky from across the state, and because of that, you get features represented from many different parts of the state. You also get a lot of influx of people from other states and people from other countries, and that makes Lexington an interesting mix.
This mix has led to new influences and changes in the individual speaking styles of many students at both the phonetic and lexical levels. This is especially true among fellow Kentuckians, as UK senior Amanda Gill points out as she comments on her Western Kentuckian dialect.
So then do you think that you have a dialect based on that?
I definitely do, and I also believe it has changed a little bit since I've gotten to Lexington, hearing how other people phrase things. It's kind of shaped my way of speaking. And a few months ago I was talking on the phone with my brother, and he said, "Have you visited home recently?" And I was like, "Yeah, I went home last week." And he's like, "I can tell because you're talking a lot more country than you have been in the past couple of years." So it varies.
In addition to accents, some dialectal differences are visible at the syntactic level, as this Louisville native points out with the modal would.
They always get on me about saying, instead of saying, "Do you want to go to the mall tomorrow?" I say, "Would you want to go to the mall tomorrow?" or something like that. And so they say, I've heard people tell me about that, comment on the way I say stuff like that, or I say y'all sometimes.
The frequent contact of different dialects within the Lexington community leads some to make new lexical choices. Speakers of one dialect may alter their word choices because they want to feel like they fit in, or simply because they like the way it sounds better. Gill explains how living in Lexington has affected some of her own word choices.
One example I have that fits perfectly is growing up, like sometimes people refer to soda as soda or pop, or some people refer to it in general, like all is just Coke. And I grew up saying Coke for even if it's Sprite, any Coke product. And then I came to Lexington, I've lived here for a couple years, and I noticed no one else did that, and then I thought about it. And then I realized saying Coke for everything doesn't really make sense, but I also think pop is kind of silly, so I've adapted my word choice and I say soda now, whereas growing up I always said Coke.
Despite the borrowing and blending of dialects within the university community, Kentuckians can still distinguish between different regional dialects.
But my roommate, she's from Eastern Kentucky, and she says when I talk on the phone with my family, she can definitely tell my Western Kentucky drawl comes out.
While many people would be quick to consider Kentucky a southern state in terms of geography and dialectology, Dr. Kramer points out that Kentucky's geographic and linguistic categorization is much more ambiguous.
In dialectal maps, usually the entire state of Kentucky is marked as being a southern dialect state. But with the Appalachian Mountains in the eastern part of the state and with larger cities like Louisville and Lexington, we actually find that it's much more variable than that. So it's more likely that we would describe Kentucky as in a transition zone, especially the river towns near Cincinnati and Louisville. Those areas tend to be much more variable in their dialect productions.
UK student Robert Cam exemplifies this variation, as his speech production mirrors that of a Midwestern dialect that many would not think of as especially Kentuckian.
A lot of people would not guess that I'm from Kentucky because of the way that I talk, but I'm from the extreme northern part. I can walk to Cincinnati from where I'm from, so I would say that I'm not of the stereotypical Kentucky accent or dialect.
Differences in the production of vowel sounds is a key feature difference between northern and southern varieties of American English. Note the differences in vowel pronunciation between these UK students.
I am Robert Cam.
My name's Courtney Asher.
I'm from a really small town. It's about 6,000 people.
Because I grew up in the mountains of southeastern Kentucky. Everybody talks the same.
It has one major avenue and then, probably 10 streets up, 10 streets down. to the Ohio River. That's about it.
It's very interesting because living in central Kentucky the past couple of years, I can kind of tell by how someone speaks whether they're from Eastern or Western.
Certain words and stuff that you don't hear other places.
What kind of words would that be?
There are a lot of places that say you-ins instead of you all.
These perceived differences in phonetic vowel sounds or the lexical entry that means a sweet carbonated beverage makes one wonder, how are these dialects geographically divided?
That's a great question because I work in perceptual dialectology, which is an area that focuses on how non-linguists view the dialect landscape. And it's very fascinating when you ask Kentuckians and non-Kentuckians where they see different dialects. A lot of what people want to mark are the regional divisions that are common in tourist bureaus like Northern Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky. Sometimes they'll use bluegrass to define the area around Lexington.
So, from a perceptual dialectologist standpoint, the boundaries that define the dialects of Kentucky are unique to each person. As these dialects maps drawn by UK students show, some people's ideas of dialect boundaries can be quite complex.
My mom's from southeastern Kentucky, so I know that southern, southeastern, and eastern Kentucky are definitely different, and the people that say they're from Lexington, born and raised, definitely have a different accent than people that are from southern Kentucky. And northern Kentucky just have a class of their own. It's just like 3 or 4 counties that are side by side.
Others draw simpler distinctions.
I have less country, which is like more of the Louisville region, super country, which is eastern, and then like just regular country.
While significant dialectal differences exist within the Bluegrass State, there are some linguistic features that many Kentuckians share in common. One example being the pronunciation of the state's largest city.
There are certain features definitely that Kentuckians are known for. Certain words, certain pronunciations of words. The best example is the name of the city, the largest city. People from Louisville, like me, will say Louisville as opposed to Louisville, and often have big debates about proper pronunciation, especially with outsiders who don't understand what they're saying when they say Louisville.
So can you tell me all the different ways that you can say your hometown?
Okay, Louisville, 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 but the way that I say it is Louisville.
Dialect can be strongly or loosely tied to one's identity. A distinct dialect can serve as an identifier that could allow one to feel unique and remembered in a large world where people are often forgotten. One may also change dialects to adjust to different social situations, therefore crafting certain identities depending on what image one is trying to project.
Well, Kentuckians and probably lots of Southerners, lots of Appalachians, and actually a lot of people who speak what might be considered non-standard dialects end up with lots of identities, especially with regard to how they speak.
It's where you're from really shapes who you are, your personality, and like the things that you believe, your values.
How I speak, like my accent and the way I phrase things, that's strongly shaped by how I grew up, the people who molded me into who I am. So I definitely identify it as something that's part of me. And I actually take pride in it. I think it's a great identifier. Like if I move off someplace and I'm trying to get a job, they'll remember me if I speak a little differently.
Overall, dialects seem to be important to people as they reflect their upbringings and remind them of their roots.
Our interviews with linguistic experts and students have shown that stereotypes about Kentucky dialects are often simplistic and untrue. By examining both the history of language in Kentucky as well as current speech, we were able to see that dialects in the state were actually quite complex. In fact, significant language variation can be experienced even on UK's campus. There is no such thing as one Kentucky dialect. But what about the future of Kentucky dialects? Many people fear that dialects are dying out. However, you can see from our research that this is not the case in Kentucky. In fact, dialects are still very much apparent. So this phenomenon is unlikely to happen in Kentucky. Why? Because linguistic identity separates Kentucky from other regions. For students, their language may represent their roots, and for others, it represents their cultural heritage. It gives them a sense of security and of belonging. As a result, it's unlikely that the unique dialects in Kentucky will disappear anytime soon.